Hello, everybody. Welcome to this workshop on global food security and emergency. I'm very happy to be today the moderator of this event. I'm Elisabeth Clavry de Saint-Martin, CEO of CIRAD, who is a center for research on agriculture established internationally and trying to build solutions for the agriculture of tomorrow. Since the war in Ukraine, a lot of attention and political attention has been focused on global insecurity, food insecurity, and the question of nutrition. However, this question is not a new one, especially for all the actors working on food security. Structural problems, climate change, wars, loss of biodiversity have been affecting food security around the world. Today, to discuss the solution, to go deeper in the analysis concerning the crisis that today we are experiencing, I have the honor to have around this table 4 people especially distinguished to talk about this subject. So I have Massimo Torero, the chief economist of the Food and Agriculture Organization, the FAO. Welcome, Massimo. Next, we have Thuraya Triki, who is the director of Sustainable Production, Market and Institution Division at IFAD, also a Roma institution. So welcome, Thuraya. Then we have Gorgi Ghosh, who is the president for Global Policy and Advocacy at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And finally, we have Nada El Majoub, who is the executive vice president for performance management of OCP, so fertilizer groups. So I will start with you, Massimo, with the first questions. FAO has been deeply involved to try to solve this crisis. So what is your analysis of the crisis, and what are the solutions the FAO has proposed to solve the main problems?
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me start by looking at what are the drivers of the problem. So conflict is the first one, and now war, followed by slowdowns and downturns, and COVID-19 has been affecting how the economies grow and not grow. And the last one, of course, is the issue of climate change. That's the ranking that we have, but they interrelate to each other. Now, if you look at those drivers, and you look that we are living in water stress and huge poverty and inequality, poverty has moved down backwards 10 years in the last 3 years. That photographs give us 828 million people chronically undernourished today. 3.1 billion people don't have access to healthy diets, and a lot of inequality. Inequality has increased substantially. So that's the situation we are living today. Now, if we look at the exacerbation that the war in Ukraine has created, and the problem of input prices because of the relationship with the energy, natural gas, which has increased the price of fertilizers, and we also add to that the potential challenges that we will be facing in the future because of climate change, we are living in a very vulnerable world where we have a lot of risk and uncertainty. So we need to understand the agricultural sector is a sector that will be living under risk and uncertainty. And that makes it very difficult to manage those risks and uncertainties. Risks you can manage because you know the loss and you can insure for the loss, but uncertainties you cannot. And that's what happened with COVID and what happened with the Ukraine war, which nobody had expected. So what we can do? So there are several things that we have to do quickly. Right now, this year, the major problem is a problem of food access. Why? Because of the price increases, which were in the peak in March of this year, and which has been declining slightly, but cereal prices still are going up, plus the exchange rate devaluation because of what is happening in international increase of interest rates that is affecting the import bill of the most vulnerable countries. At the global level, the import bill has increased by approximately close to $2 trillion, and for the most vulnerable 62 countries, $25 billion. That means that the poorest countries won't be able to have access to food unless we support them in different ways. So we need to tackle that. And to tackle that, we need to have trade. Trade needs to flow. It's extremely important, but we also need to target the most vulnerable people. We need to target the countries that are facing the major challenges and help them to be able to have access, because today they have significant budget constraints, they are highly indebted, and they don't have the capacity to compensate the food import bill. So there is a lot of effort that needs to be done in that sense. Also, we need to find ways to increase efficiencies very quickly. The input market is facing a significant challenge because affordability is going down. Farmers cannot afford the input costs. And it's not just fertilizers. Remember, to produce seeds, you need fertilizers. So seeds are also increasing. So we need to find ways to be very efficient in the way we use fertilizers. And for that, we are promoting soil nutrition maps. But we also need to be efficient in targeting interventions to the most vulnerable, to the smallholders, so that we use the scarce resources in the best efficient way. And finally, for us, the one which is simple is we need to reduce food loss and waste.
Thank you very much, Massimo, both for the in-depth analysis and the first possibility of solution that you mentioned. Turaya, Massimo just mentioned that the poor have been disproportionately affected by this crisis. So IFAD mandate really centers on small producer and on rural poor. So you're at the heart of the problem. So what has done IFAD to help this population and to give some hints of solution?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak about this very important topic for us in IFAD. So definitely small-scale producers and rural poor involved in food systems are a very important part of this agenda, simply because they produce 1/3 actually of the global food supply. 5 out of 6 farms have a size of less than 2 hectares. These small-scale producers are also the most vulnerable to climate change, and they are burning actually the negative implication of what is currently happening in terms of adverse climate events. Of course, in IFAD, our mandate is centered around this very important segment. As an international financial institution, the UN agency specialized in agriculture, we have been actually using different financial instruments that are at our disposal. So typically, IFAD has a sovereign program of lending of about 1.5 billion annually that we've been using to tackle some of the issues that were raised by Massimo. We have been investing in projects that are promoting access to input, be it fertilizer, seeds, but also access to water. Because, I mean, you can put all the seeds and the fertilizer. If you don't have water, and we know that a lot of this agriculture is rain-fed, then nothing would happen. Equally important for us has been to build the capacity of the farmers and their organizations, including on climate-smart practices, providing the access to markets. We have launched a crisis response initiative that is zooming on a subset of countries where the situation is particularly dire, both in terms of vulnerability to climate change, but also for food security, where challenges of affordability, accessibility linked to the absence of fiscal space to borrow more make it very impossible actually for the government to operate. Last but not least, we've been also catering directly to the needs of the private sector. We have launched the private sector financing program that today is providing funding either to local players, be it financial intermediaries to improve access to finance, but also to rural SMEs and whose business model is centered around the small-scale producers. Of course, our work on the investment side is very often accompanied by an effort to bring our technical expertise and also to advise on good policies, which is very important. And I feel that sometimes we don't speak enough about the need for investment to be accompanied by the right policies to shift actually the investment to those who need it first. And IFAD has been also losing its convening power to also at the global level, an initiative like the FARM, launched by France under the EC presidency, by the Global Alliance for Food Security. So we are also advocating for greater coordination at the global level. We need all the actors to be working together, greater efforts between donors, recipient countries, but also between the public sector, the private sector, and the farm organization, civil society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Turaya. So a very active work of IFAD and a lot of tools, new tools, to address global food insecurity, especially on the small orders. So Gorgi, the Gates Foundation has been involved for a long time to fight global food insecurity. you're working with FAO and IFAD. So on this crisis, you've responded very rapidly. So what did you do? And at the end, what do you think has been the more efficient?
Thank you. First, thank you for having me and to the forum for having a panel on this super important topic. So, we've been working with smallholder farmers for over a decade to help increase productivity. And so our lens on this moment actually zooms down to really the household level. The numbers are at a scale that is catastrophic, but our experience is very much with households, where we're seeing some of the trends that Massimo described really in a tangible way. So we're seeing people substituting regular diets, which are becoming too expensive, with less nutritious staple crops. So giving up dairy or poultry in favor of staples, which are cheaper. And of course, the reduced nutritional impact is quite substantial for children particularly, or pregnant moms. And this is a way by which a short-term crisis becomes a sort of generational crisis. We're seeing women, of course, eat less and last, and we're seeing that in dozens of countries around the world as food shortages affect families. And we're seeing farmers try to plant with less, or plant less, or just exit farming, and that is upending livelihoods. So this is real for families that we have worked with for many, many years. Our response has been threefold, really matching the problems as I described. First, nutrition. This is a food crisis, it's also a nutrition crisis, and so we've been very focused on increasing fortified food availability, on ready-to-use therapeutic foods, to make sure wherever we can that micronutrients, nutritious foods are maintained in people's diets. Second, production. We share the great concern about the lack of fertilizer or access to fertilizer, and have been partnering with OCP and others to try and make fertilizer available at more affordable prices through an initiative called Sustain Africa. And finally, resilience. As Massimo said, the proximal cause of the crisis may be Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but it was in the works for several planting seasons because we haven't invested enough in the resilience of farming approaches and seeds, techniques to climate change. And so we have just recently announced a commitment to invest $1 billion, $1.4 billion over the next few years to support the resilience of agriculture in low-income countries to climate change.
Thank you very much, Gaji. Now that, just as Gaji mentioned that, the question of fertilizer is key to this crisis and has been raised since the beginning. So what are you doing to ease this crisis, this shortage of available fertilizer, and what have you been doing before? Because I know you already had actions concerning fertilizer.
That's right. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And first, let me say that I'm very happy and very excited to be here. So thank you for the invitation. And thank you, like Archie said, thank you for adding that theme into very busy 2 days, because indeed it is of the utmost importance. So let me first start by probably setting the scene on what we've been seeing for the past few months now. The world has been in a food crisis for more than 2 years. The stock-to-use ratios are the lowest we've seen in more than 2 decades. So there is this misconception that the war has started this, but actually it's been there for much longer than since last February. The war broke out in an already dire environment that had already been seeing the impacts of climate change, that had already been seeing the impacts of an underinvestment in an also vital sector. So, you know, that had a direct impact in prices and in affordability, but that also had direct impact in terms of availability. And of course, when the world deals with a large availability and affordability crisis, well, all regions are not equal facing that challenge. The most vulnerable are the ones that actually most impacted, and it so happens that it's in this case the case of Africa. When the World Bank, for example, says that the fertilizers on average doubled in terms of cost, and I'm only talking about fertilizer, but of course, you all know that all ag inputs have seen their prices soar for a few months now. When that average worldwide is about twice, well, that same number in Africa is 4 times, 5 times. When you put that in front of the fact that the food budget in an average household in a developed country is about 10% of the household budget, and while in Africa it's 50%, when that doubles, that goes to 20% for a developed country, while it's actually almost 100% of an African household. So just to give you, a sense of how difficult and how dire the situation is. So back to what OCP did in that context. Well, first of all, we kept our plants running at their maximum rate in a context where supply chains were distressed all around the world. For example, half of our ammonia used to come from Russia. When the war broke out, we were able very swiftly to replace all our sourcing of ammonia that used to come from other parts of the world. And that helped us keep putting those fertilizers out there, those very vital inputs, so that our customers and basically farmers all around the world were not impacted by that fact. That's one. The second one is that we launched a first time ever large-scale relief program of about 550 kilotons of phosphate-based fertilizers. Just to give you an idea of how much that represents, it's about 20% of African consumption, and it's about 16% of our output there. So that basically moved the needle as for the crop that's undergoing, as for this season. So that was launched in May. And a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure you all know, our chairman announced at the World Bank's annual meetings the second edition of that program. And so from a little over 500,000 of fertilizer, now we are talking about 4 million tons of fertilizers that are allotted, that are dedicated to the African continent for next season. It's about 80% of that continent's needs, and the reason why we're doing this is to make sure that the most vulnerable farmers out there get access to the fertilizer that they also need to protect those crops.
Thank you very much. So we've been talking about the short-term actions and the diagnosis. Perhaps we should take some time to think about what could be done on longer term. So Massimo, from your point of view, what should be done to address the more structural problems concerning global food insecurity?
So look, every crisis brings an opportunity, but crises are sad and terrible, like what we are observing now. For me, there are 2 blocks of things that we need to learn from. First, developed countries need to increase their solidarity, because if they keep putting measures like the ones they are doing right now to reduce their inflation, they are going to significantly devaluate exchange rates of poor countries, and that will have a huge effect over the import bills. So it is important that they think carefully how they can slow. The US announced today that they will slow the way they increase interest rates. That's a very good news, but it has to be applied to all developed countries. And that's something to learn for the future, because what happened in those countries was a mistake of the recovery policy that they implement. The second thing is what we do with the farmers and what we do with the countries which are so vulnerable. And that's where the resilience component comes. And resilience has 3 dimensions. The first one is early warning, how we can help them to have better information, to make proper decisions, and to be better prepared. And that requires very good early warning tools that have predictive power. And that includes insurance. We need to deploy better insurance and lower the cost of the reinsurance, especially for the poorest countries. Even today, for the food crisis countries, it will be cheaper to have an insurance in place for catastrophic purposes than what we are doing today to resolve their problem. The second part of resilience is how I can absorb, and how can I absorb a shock. And that's where data, innovation, science, and technology will play a crucial role. We need to develop new technologies. We need to accelerate the process of transformation, but we need to make it affordable. If someone has to do precision farming, those are smallholders. But they cannot afford the satellite information, the soil maps every month, and so on and so forth. That's the role of us. We can create public goods of information that will help them to have access to the same tools that the big farmers have. And we need to work intensively on that, and for that we need support from the donors. And the third element of resilience is what tools I need to build back better, to reduce inequality. And that's where infrastructure, not only hard roads, electricity, and so on, plays a role, but also value chain infrastructure. It's very important to invest on that and to target that properly. One of the major problems we have today is that we don't target properly. We don't have the data to tell in territorial approaches where to target interventions. We just do what we were doing before, and we lose a lot of money. So we need to improve the effectiveness of how we intervene in those areas.
Thank you very much, Massimo. So, Turaya, from IFAT perspective, what could be done, just as Massimo said, to reach the right people with the right solutions? So what contribution for long-term problem, and I was thinking especially of climate change, could IFAT make?
Thank you very much. Actually, that's a question that could take the entire afternoon, almost the week. But as I'll try to focus on a few things. One, I think we need to walk the talk on the need to scale up investment in the long-term transformation. Today, the farming and the food system are fundamentally non-sustainable. They are contributing to 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emission and causing 60% of the biodiversity loss. If we look at the current statistic, we can see that ODA has been stagnating while the emergency flows are increasing. Of course, emergency interventions are very important, but that, as I said, something key. What we are observing today is just a reflection of decades of underinvestment in agriculture. Of course, as Massimo said, COVID, climate, and the conflicts are making it worse, but we really need to change it. I mean, just maybe an anecdote, IFAD was created 40 years ago to address a food crisis, and today we're sitting here discussing the same issues. So that's the first thing. Second, I think we need to stop talking about solutions where there is a trade-off between food and climate. We need to look for solutions that deliver multiple co-benefits. Today, there is a need to scale up investment to make this food system sustainable, be it a medication adaptation. Obviously, on the adaptation side, there's a huge underinvestment that needs to be filled. IFAD, actually, we are quite active in this space. 90% of our investment in climate are focusing on adaptation, but we need to get this right. Third, promoting sustainable production needs to go hand in hand with efforts to, one, work on consumption habit and promote better nutrition. Second, access to markets. We can actually, it's very good to help these farmers to increase production, but if they don't have access to markets to sell at a fair price, this will not translate into improved livelihood, nor in enhanced resilience. Food and loss waste is also a huge opportunity. 1/3 of the food is today being lost or wasted. If we think about the economic implication and the food implication, but also about the nature, think about the land and the water that's being used today, and also the fertilizers that are being used to produce it. I would also finish by a plea for enhanced coordination. There has been an interesting report actually a few months ago showing that one of the problems for agricultural finance is the lack of coordination. There are a large number of initiatives set by different actors with a lot of goodwill. I think there is an opportunity for us to enhance, goes back to the efficiency argument, that we can better coordinate in order to deliver impact and make a dent in poverty and hunger. Thank you.
Thank you. Gaji, from the Gates Foundation perspective, you're a huge player and you are convening power too. What would you ask the international community to commit for long-term action, and how would you yourself, as a foundation, commit to do on this long-term solution basis?
Thank you. Well, I'll just pick up where you left off. I think this week is COP27 in Egypt, and it's incredible to have a focus on adaptation. Only about 1/4 of climate funding goes to adaptation now, and an even smaller bit of that goes to agriculture adaptation. And yet, when I think about resilience for long-term productivity, adapting to climate change is going to be critical. Just to give you an example, maize, a crop that is, Massimo will correct me, 30% of calories in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, very, very sensitive to temperature. So, any degree above 30 degrees Celsius, you lose 1% of yield. And so if you have 5 days, 5 degrees over, that's 25% yield loss. So that's the kind of immediate effect we're feeling now, but the research needed has fallen behind. So can we make rice farming techniques less water intensive? Livestock, can we find ways that is more intensive rather than extensive, requiring more land? Drought tolerant or flood tolerant seeds. That all has to be part of the agenda. And so we are very excited and hope the commitment to increase adaptation financing will actually be delivered. We are increasing our own financing in that area, but will be a small portion of what's needed. So very much hope the international community delivers on their promises.
Thank you very much, Gaji. Now that you just presented us your recent initiative, the recent initiative OCP has been proposing. If we take a long-term perspective, what could be done? What other initiative could be proposed?
Okay, so I want to say a little piece about how these two temporalities, the short term and the long term, are actually very much interlinked. Because for example, when we launched the 550 kiloton relief program in Africa, I mean, you would think that we would not have been able to do that had we not been investing physically in the continent for a decade now. If we did not build the relationships we built, if we did not mobilize the actors, the stakeholders of the whole value chain over the past decade, if we were not, frankly, present through our 12 subsidiaries there, that could not have been made possible, because you wouldn't know just by deciding one morning that you were going to, allocate 550 kiloton of fertilizer, that they were going to end up in the right hands. And so even your ability to act in the short term to relieve an urgent situation lays upon a foundation of long-term engagement. I just wanted to put that out there because I think it's important, and we sometimes think of these two temporalities as extremely separate, while actually they're not. That's one. The second one is, I would think that long-term, the key word is investment. And investment would happen if it were de-risked. Because, let's say it, we've been talking about increasing investment in Africa for at least 10 years or so, or probably even more. I've done a lot of panels, particularly like this one, and it's the word in everyone's mouth of how we can increase investments in Africa. But no one really dares say why, we've been talking about it so much, and not a lot of it has happened before. I think it has to do with perception, at least partially, because when we think of Africa, mostly we think of Africa as the problem, as the vulnerable continent, as the one that would require, contribution and investment and aid and subsidies, and, sometimes other colleagues of mine call it the S word. Well, we need a paradigm shift there. Let's not forget that 60% of arable land actually is in Africa. Let's not forget that it's almost more risky today not to invest in Africa than to invest in Africa. I mean, take a look. Where is it elsewhere in the world where, it's not as risky than it is in Africa today to invest? So I think a lot of it has to do with that perception change that needs to happen in everyone's mind, like it did in ours. We started investing in Africa in capacity building. Would it be only for production, for increasing our capacity, where we quintupled? We went from a player of 2.3 million tons to one with 15 million tons next year. That happens when it is religious for you that Africa is indeed the future, and you put your money where your mouth is, and you actually do, local investment. And then once you do that, then you go ahead and allocate a portion of that volume within the African continent. You don't export all of it out there. Like, I don't want to name names, but I don't think it's, it's the case for everyone, all the producers in the continent. And I think, there's something to be done there. So, and one last thing before I yield the floor back to you. I don't want to, I get passionate about this stuff, and sometimes I go overboard. But investment is not just investment for extra capacity. It's also investment, like Massimo was saying, in capacity building, in education, in extension services, in actually being there for that smallholder farmer, like Toraya said, making sure that they have the insurance that they need, that they have the access to financing that they need, that they have the access to market that they need. It's an ecosystemical approach. It takes the contribution of everyone, and it's long-term, and there you go.
Thank you very much, Nada. We have the chance to have passionate speakers here, and that's a real pleasure. So we have some time for questions. So if in the audience you have questions, you must raise your hand, and I guess a mic will come to you. So I can see one hand. I'm looking for the mics to come. Okay, the mic is coming. All right. Oh, there is another one here. Okay. So you just start, and then we'll hand it over to you. Okay.
Okay. Je ne sais pas si ça fonctionne. Je vais le faire en français.
I will ask my question in French. These were very interesting comments, but the question that I ask myself is when I see how you share your observation and actions, I wonder in reality, what are you doing together? What can you do together? How can you work together better? Because I can see that you have the same observation, you have means, you have knowledge, and I'd like to say, well,
Okay.
what next? What are you doing? How do you actually work together? Because your points of view seem to converge, and yet I think your actions do not necessarily converge.
Because translation is not working. The question was that the diagnosis you made seem very converging. So what can you do together? Do you think together already? And what could you do more together?
So I think, and very briefly, the problem is a lot bigger than us. We are a piece of it, and we have to work together. But if you look historically, you see areas like the Sahel in crisis for 20, 30 years, dry corridor in Central America in crisis for 10 and 30 years. And there has been a lot of aid and investment in those areas. Nothing has worked. So something is wrong, and it's part of the coordination issue. So I really think we have a coordination failure by the donors, by the implementers, and we need to find ways to at least know what is happening where so that we can be more efficient and gain complementarities.
Thank you. Yeah, just one, and then we take another question.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. I tried to be very honest about this question of coordination, but that doesn't mean that we don't work together. We work together a lot on the same projects with the FAO. I know that we have collaboration on gender questions. We haven't talked much about women on this panel, but we do work on promoting women's autonomy and empowerment so that they can participate, and they're very involved in the agricultural question. I think there are a lot of efforts that are carried out jointly, and there are concrete interventions and actions that take place. I don't know if I can give you a concrete example with the OCP, but we have discussed with them quite a bit, and we do things together, and Massimo knows well that the current crisis underscores our collective responsibility to do more and to do better. Thank you. We'll take another question.
Hello, my name is Anas Dauda Sadauki. I'm the founder Awareness Against Terrorism. My question about this program is, I want to ask, there are so many farmers in Africa, especially in Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, Niger, and Mali. But there are so many terrorists in that places, because sometimes the farmers has paid the terrorists money before they leave them to farm. So what contribution you can give that farmer about this program? Thank you.
Okay, Soraya.
Okay, I'll try to be brief here. And your question speaks also, is very closely to my heart. I'm Tunisian. And as you said, most of the young people, when they cannot find opportunities in their own country, they end up either crossing the Mediterranean, trying for illegal immigration, or joining a terrorist group. Actually, when we launched our private sector financing program, our first investment was in a company in Nigeria, in the northern part that is affected by Boko Haram. It was funded by young Nigerians who developed a very interesting franchising model, offering farmers a comprehensive package of funding, inputs, access to markets, with the very ambition to provide them with another opportunity than joining a terrorist group. And we're very, very actually proud to be part of this group. This is an illustration also of what we do in other places. So we have been also investing significantly in public sector projects, focusing particularly on youth, be it men and women, to give them an opportunity and another option so that they can stay home and they can have decent jobs, decent livelihood, and not join to a terrorist account. Thank you.
Thank you. Massimo?
Only briefly, so I come from Peru. You know, Peru was destroyed by the terrorism. And I see the only way you can fight against terrorism is reducing inequalities. That's the only way. And that's provide human capital and provide infrastructure so they can have more opportunities and more access to things. If you don't do that, then always they will spark again and will spark again.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the answers. Do we have other questions in the audience? There is one again here, or same. Oh, perhaps a woman.
Hello.
Speak loud.
Hello. Yeah, can you hear me? Hi, thanks for this intervention. My name is Annalisa. I'm a recent graduate in Human Rights and Development Management. My question concerns youth. As I belong to them, I'm very interested in them. It's an open question, so I don't expect a specific answer, but more of an opinion. In the African spectrum, I see two main interventions and challenges. The first is microfinance, and the second is digitalization, let's say DG Farm, the role of CGAP, Melinda Gates, IFED. I would like your perspective on what do you think is best for new generations, also considering the youth bulge that Africa has, and considering that major investment is in agriculture, and there's so many reports saying that youth is not very attracted to agriculture, they would like to do more, but it's actually what we need to invest in. So if I can have a general opinion, thank you.
That's a very interesting question. Who wants to take it? Perhaps, yeah, Gargi.
Yeah, thank you. Two thoughts about that. Well, our work doesn't focus explicitly on kind of youth employment as an objective. Clearly, one of the benefits of strengthening the resilience of livelihoods is that they become more attractive opportunities for youth. So the way we have been thinking about our work in agriculture does have that effect of needing to make smallholder farming connect to markets and an attractive proposition for the next generation. And we're seeing some of those benefits. I would say also there's quite a bit of exciting work happening now strengthening the value chain. So it's not just farming, but aggregators, digital apps, as you said, so that there are more a wider spectrum of opportunities in the agriculture sector. I was not long ago at a training program, visiting a training program in Rwanda, where they were educating students to play roles as ag entrepreneurs, different parts of the value chain, and there were dozens of young people coming from families that were not farming families. They were choosing the sector on their own because they saw opportunity there, and that to me was a sign that there was dynamism in that sector in exactly the way we need.
Thank you.
Only
Okay.
one comment here. COVID-19 has created a huge opportunity because digitalization has moved. But this is very nice, no? But if you don't have electricity and you don't know how to read and write, it's useless. So we need to accelerate more the process so that we can make it inclusive. And that's the role of us. We need to create public goods that people can have access to those and create the capabilities. If not, they won't benefit from it.
Soraya?
Maybe if I may add to the question, actually IFAD is very committed to promoting youth. We have made corporate commitments that more than 50% of our investment will be youth sensitive. And like my colleagues, we've been working a lot on promoting the economic inclusion, creating jobs and economic opportunity through agri-entrepreneurship, digitalization. But equally important is also, one, to give youth a voice. So we have been promoting, for example, youth participation, producer organization in policy processes. It's very, very important that we allow them the space to also shape the future. So that's one area. Second is try also to make them active actors of this whole agenda about climate, resilience to climate change, climate adaptation, green jobs. So you mentioned digitalization, but I would like also to put on the table green jobs as an opportunity for young men and women. So it's not only about providing microfinance or about digitalization, it's about looking for different entry points, whether it's about operating and maintenance for infrastructure irrigation, about green jobs. We really need also to avoid this cliche that the entry points can only be microfinance and digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess we have one last questions. I could see. Yeah.
D'accord. Excusez-moi de reprendre la parole. C'est juste,
Yes.
je me demandais aussi en écoutant.
I was also wondering,
en
as I
réalité, il y a
listened to you,
30%
I think
de nourriture qui est perdue.
30% of food is lost.
So, j'imaginais que peut-être
According
dans
to
ces situations
statistics.
d'urgence auxquelles on va faire face
So,
pour des raisons de changement climatique et pour des raisons de
I
guerre en
think
Ukraine,
as
est-ce qu'il y a
climate
pas,
change comes
plutôt
along
que
and
de
with the war in
diversifier
Ukraine,
les solutions, je
maybe
vois
we
que
need to
c'est compliqué, faut penser
diversify
à
our
plein de solutions
solutions.
pour
I think, of
l'avenir.
course, we have to
Est-ce
think
qu'il
of
y
a
a
lot
pas
of
un
different
moyen
solutions for the future,
de
but
régler de
isn't
façon
there a way
drastique,
to
radicale et un
take
peu
some
urgente, de
radical and
réduire de
urgent
façon
measures
drastique, radicale et un
against
peu urgente
food waste and
ces
food loss?
30% de nourriture
When we
qui ont
look at
été produites et qui
30% of
apparemment ne
food
sont
that
pas
has been
utilisées.
produced and is
Ça
not
paraît, le chiffre
used,
paraît tellement énorme.
it seems
Est-ce qu'en
to me to be a
réduisant ça, on
huge
n'a pas
amount.
déjà
If we could reduce that
rempli
30%,
ou
wouldn't that
répondu à une
already
grande partie du
solve
problème
a
de
big part of
l'urgence
the
en matière
problem
alimentaire?
or reduce
Ou
the
pas? C'est peut-être très
urgency
simpliste,
of
hein, ce que je
the
raconte.
food shortages?
Thank you. That's
Or
also a
maybe
very
my
interesting
question is too
We are very
simplistic.
lucky with the questions. So, Massimo, on this question, because FAO has worked a lot.
Well, first, the definition. No food loss goes up to wholesale included, waste after to retail to consumer. Now, we need to start at home. Waste here is because of regulation problems and behavioral change. The same in the US and in other northern countries. It's amazing the amount of food is waste because regulation is not flexible. Losses is happening more in developing countries, but also in developed countries. The issue with waste is when you destroy food, you create more methane emissions in addition to what you already did by producing the food. On losses, if you want to include the small farmers, we need to come with investment in infrastructure and innovations. But we need to tackle both at the same time because the 14% of loss and the 17% of waste could create significant returns quickly with the minimum trade-offs. And that's something that we should do, and governments need to move quickly and react to the policy changes that they need.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are going to the end, unfortunately, of this workshop. It's very hard to make a synthesis of all that's been said, so I would first thank you very much, our speakers, because they have been really passionate and at the same time very synthetic about their proposal. And just conclude in saying that all we've been discussing here is that on short term we have to keep the pressure on this question of global insecurity and how to resolve it, and we need solidarity, we need cooperation, and we need coordination, and we need to keep it high on the agenda of our politicians. That's the first point. And on the long run, and you've been insisting on it, we need to solve the structural problem so that we do not meet again in 5, 10, or 15 years with the same questions. And you've been all talking about climate change, access to nutrients and fertilizer, the question of investment, because agriculture has been a lot disinvested this year, and how to put it again high on the agenda of the donors and the Agency of Development. You've been talking also about the global perspective, again, on nutrition, on decent revenue, and how to make it happen, that agriculture is a solution and not a problem when it comes to the crisis and the conflict. So thank you very much for your participation, and also thank you very much for the audience to have stayed with us. Thank you.